Welcome back to the Word on Woodward, and it's time now for the headliner segment presented by Miller Lite. And let's bring in a longtime friend of mine, one of my best friends, one of the most decent people I know, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But the television voice of the Detroit Tigers, Matt Shepard. I first, I guess, want to ask you is, I'm glad the family is safe and sound and everybody doing well. He has his children are all like prodigies in some sort of field and all that kind of stuff. I know you and Lisa have to be proud of your family. Just great kids. No, it's true. Look at him. He's like, but it's true. But okay, you're in Florida. You're watching the Tigers, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm pretty, Riley Green looks good. We have maybe some young pitchers. You sort of see a semblance of this rebuilding starting to take shape. That there's an actual core and there's a team here. And then all of a sudden it ends. What were you doing? Did you get a sign that it was going to be canceled? How did that all play out for you?
We had a broadcast on a Tuesday on Fox Sports Detroit, and I always like to stick around at least another day to watch another game or practice on the backfields if the big league squad is somewhere else, if they're on a road spring training game. So I was able to do that on Wednesday, and then I took a late flight Thursday because I noticed that the Tigers were playing the Braves there at Joker Marchant Stadium, and I wanted to watch part of that too. I like watching different teams. I like comparing Detroit's youth with some of those, and I like sticking around the complex because, as you know, Art, with the Red Wings, that's how you get to know players. So when you're up in Traverse City, you're always talking to some of the younger guys who may be destined for Grand Rapids, but it gives you a better feel. It gives you a better idea of who those players are, what they can do, and they get to know you too. And I think that's really important. So that was my line of thinking, to stick around for Thursday to watch part of the Tigers and Braves. And I don't know if it was the fourth or fifth inning or so that we were talking in the press box there at the stadium where we started to wonder if they were going to get through this game and then how long of a delay was going to be spring training the rest of the way. And it started to filter through. I had to leave, and by the time I think I got to the Tampa airport, everybody had decided and knew that the Tigers were going to have, like everybody else in baseball, suspend their spring training.
One thing I think that a lot of sports fans have done, and Fox is doing a great job. I know the Wings and Tigers are also streaming classic games, and I remember watching the game of the World Series of 1968. And I'm old enough to the 68 Tigers are still my team. And my mother, and a lot of people don't know this, a lot of the people I work with the Red Wings who are younger than me, World Series games were in the afternoon. There were no night games back then. In this game, Game 7 of a World Series between the Tigers and Cardinals, Bob Gibson versus Mickey Lolich was in the afternoon, and my mom let me stay home from school. And the thing I remember about that, not only the Tigers winning, was that I live in Livonia right off of Middle Belt, and that's a direct route to Metro Airport. And when the Tigers won, Middle Belt was packed from Livonia all the way to Romulus with people honking their horns to greet the Tigers at Metro Airport. And they ended up flying to City because there was too many people, a City airport.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But it was crazy. It was absolutely bedlam and crazy. Watching those games, it just makes you really appreciate it. You get to see, and many of them, unfortunately, have passed away. The great Al Kaline, Jimmy Northrup, who I love, Dick McAuliffe in that stance. I mean, watching these classic games are really kind of a pick-me-up during these, uncertain times.
Oh, I'm with you. I love every second of it. I mean, and Fox Sports Detroit got a really good rating for that. Remember that game in Game 7, Art, I think it was 2 hours and 17 minutes. That's how long it took to play that game. Game 6, which was a 13-1 blowout for the Tigers, took 2 hours, I think, and 37 minutes. That's how quickly they got through it. But you and I could name every one of those players. 68 was your team. 84 was my team. Fox Sports Detroit has not only aired that 68 game, and then later on they also did the remembering of Tiger Stadium. Tiger Stadium will remember. They had the Al Kaline special as well that I thought was fabulously done. But we've had the 1984 World Series recently. They've also done the Red Wings and the Stanley Cups. You and I were both at Joe Louis Arena for those. And then you reflect back, Art, and you see how special It really was during that long stretch in Detroit to see all those great teams, all those great athletes, and share that common bond with people. It was a discussion starter. You know, you could go into a bar, you could go into a restaurant, you could go into a party and just start talking about that specific team or that era, and people jump all over. And people are going crazy right now for this classic stuff. And I think it says two things. A, how much we want to see sports and how that brings us back to normalcy. And I think two, I think it also shows you what a great sports town this truly is. You and I have said that forever. Since I've known you, it's the greatest sports town in America. And we just love our athletes and we love our teams. And those teams are always special and they'll always be special to us. For me, I'm fortunate because, you know, I've got kids and I can experience a lot of sports memories with them. But a lot of them were just stories. Even my 27-year-old son, all he did was hear about me telling him stories of how my favorite player ever, Alan Trammell, and how smooth he was and how good he was and how great the 84 team was. He's watching that classic game 1 and game 3 recently. And he's calling me the next day and he's saying, Dad, you're right, man. Absolutely. I can't wait for the Tigers to get my Alan Trammell. He loves that team. There's a bond there, right? You look back at the 97 and 98 Red Wings and the storylines, and for us to be able to share those with a new generation, all they could do before was watch YouTube highlights. All they could do before was read about it and see pictures and hear stories from us. Well, guess what? Now they can say they watched that game if they took the time, and they can recognize that Alan Trammell was as good as anybody else who played during that era. 1984, when the Tigers won the World Series, and then when Trammell and Morris were inducted into the Hall of Fame, I cried. My buddies cried. We called one another. Our validation of those teams, how we felt they were so great, even though they were passed over because of the Yankees and teams like that. And we kept screaming from the mountaintops, hey, the third team in history to go wire to wire, to see what those guys were able to do. I'll never forget that stuff. And to be able to share it with my children now through those sports classics on Fox Sports Detroit makes it even that much more special. I just hope we continue to hang on to those.
I want to go, I guess, to this year's Tiger Club because I'm eager to see it. When you looked at it, what were your impressions of spring training? You know, a guy like Riley Green, some of the young guys. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm encouraged by what I saw of the Tigers this year. You know, granted, it's going to take a little bit a while, but there does look like a semblance of a core and as a team, as I said earlier.
Well, here's what we have to keep in mind, and I've said this during our broadcast a number of times. What Al Avila inherited and how you had to rebuild, not just the Tigers, Art. You're trying to rebuild an A-ball team in Lakeland and West Michigan. You're trying to rebuild an Erie team in AA and Toledo in AAA. So when people want that turnaround to happen quickly, it's difficult. It's really challenging, and it takes time in baseball, perhaps more than any other sport. But I really like Riley Green. I said this when I saw him a year ago in talking with scouts and talking with people. I called him a fast tracker. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get them as many at-bats, have as many experiences as you possibly can, so by the time they're ready for next spring training, that they can take that jump. I don't know how much this is going to be detrimental for a guy like Riley Green, for a guy like Cody Clemens, for a guy like Parker Meadows. But long range, there's a really bright future because it's not just arms. They've got some pretty good players. And then when you get this draft, Art, and you got that number 1 overall pick at each of those rounds, you're going to get some pretty good players. There's no question about it.
Miguel Cabrera looks like a different player. He's lost some weight. I know the last couple of years he struggled with some injuries. I still think that he is one of the best hitters in baseball when he's going. I mean, heck, a bad hitter, he's like, 280 or something. And that's still a pretty good hitter the last couple of seasons. But what were your impressions of Cabrera down in spring training?
Well, you used to tell me he was a must-watch TV for you when you and I worked together, and I agree with you, and I think he will be again. I don't think he'll have the power numbers that he used to have. I don't expect 30 home runs and 120 RBIs, but what was most encouraging for me, Art, watching him down in Lakeland was he was going the other way with power, and he was going straight away center with power. The thing that amazes me about watching him in the batting cage, it's one of my favorite things to do, is stand around the batting cage, talk with Lloyd McClendon, talk with Phil Clark, talk with Joe Vavra, the new hitting coach, and say, hey, watch him go to right field. He does it on his first batting session every single time. Every pitch to right, every pitch to right. That's how he teaches a lot of the younger players, and then they start doing the same thing to use all fields. I was amazed at how he continues to be so consistent in that regard. I know it's different in a game, but if his knee is healthy and he can turn and he can generate that power from the backside, I think he's going to have a much bigger year, and it's going to help that he's got a guy like C.J. Cron and Jonathan Scope to hit behind him and add some punch into that lineup that is much needed.
When you look at the Tigers, their starting rotation, if Jordan Zimmerman can stay healthy, obviously Matt Boyd, Daniel Norris, if he can stay healthy too. I mean, encouraging. I mean, when that trade was first made, Daniel Norris was supposed to be the big get in that deal, and Matt Boyd also. And Matt Boyd, obviously, a great pitcher. Norris can do it. They've got Ivan Nova, and I love Turnbull. I just like that kid. And then if Fulmer can come back, I mean, the pitching staff seems to be shaping up at the major league level. And then, of course, all those young arms like Casey Mize, Matt Manning, Tariq Skubal. I mean, so in pitching is the key, as we know. Again, not to sound too redundant here, but, the Tigers don't look maybe as some of the pundits are saying quite as uncompetitive, if you will.
Well, they're better than they were a year ago. That doesn't mean that you and I think they're going to win the division because their talent isn't there yet. But I think what this pandemic has really hurt is Detroit's opportunity. You mentioned Michael Fulmer. He comes back in late June or July. He gives you another starter you hope you could throw into that rotation, all things considered, and it makes possible valuable trading piece somewhere else. Look, Matthew Boyd's a hell of a leader, Art. He's soft-spoken, but when he does speak, people listen. He goes about his business as professional as any athlete I've ever seen. He's really helped Spencer Turnbull. And I think the shortened spring training has hurt a number of players, but especially Spencer Turnbull, because he may have been, outside of Tariq Skubal and Casey Mize, the most impressive Tigers pitcher in Lakeland. So you're going to need guys like Matthew Boyd and Spencer Turnbull to carry some major loads, and both of them told me in Lakeland they're ready to do that.
Who could be maybe, as you said, a fast tracker, maybe some of the surprises that we should look forward to once the baseball season begins for the Tigers?
Yeah, well, here's the hard part. Because of the cancellation of spring training, and you'd have to come back and get another at least 3 weeks down in Florida before you began the season. And because we don't know how many games they would play. So, for example, I was under the belief, Art, and I truly thought that you would see Casey Mize and Tariq Skubal at some point this summer. I thought you'd see them in July or August at some point, depending on what happens with the pitching staff. But we all know you can never have enough pitchers. If they pitched the way they did a year ago in AAA like they did in AA, then you are going to see them at some point at Comerica Park. You are going to see a guy like Willie Castro at some point at Comerica Park. I don't know if you can say that now, because you're not getting enough at-bats and enough innings from those guys, and the Tigers feel there is no need to rush them, and I concur with that. So is there going to be a surprise? I don't know if there's going to be a surprise, because I'll tell you what would be a great surprise for me is if Kristen Stewart was really solid in left field defensively. That would be a very encouraging sign for all Tigers fans. If Jacoby Jones could stay healthy all season long, that would be great. It would be wonderful if Nico Goodrum could be your everyday shortstop, stay there and help you. It would be great if Jonathan Scope could go back to his all-star campaign when he was with Baltimore and do a nice job fielding the second base position. And you mentioned Jeimer Candelario earlier. It'd be great if somebody locked up that third base spot. I don't know if I can say there's a surprise. I can tell you this. What impressed me most in Lakeland is the leadership that Austin Romine showed. Here's a guy who's never been an everyday catcher, signs with Detroit for a one-year deal because he's going to get that opportunity. And he showed everybody early on now, I get it, but it was still spring training, the amount of respect people had for him so quickly, both pitchers and position players, I thought was really impressive.
I'd like to thank Matt Shepard, the television voice of the Detroit Tigers, for joining us here on The Headliner, brought to you by Miller Lite. And we'll be back with more from the Word on Woodward. Wow.